Welcome to LionWing Talks, episode 2. This is a show about all things LionWing, where we break down some news for you. I answer your questions, and we just have a good time. I'm your host, Bradley Hailstorm. I also just happen to be the founder and president of LionWing. And tonight, we've got a lot on the docket. Wow. I've got a ton of questions to go over this week. So I mentioned in episode 1 that this is mostly a show about communicating with you all, where you can drop me questions and I will commit to answering them on a weekly basis. So we had a good turnout of questions last week. We have like double the questions this week. So thank you. That's awesome. These shows will definitely always be more interesting when people ask questions. And Fusion in the checks. Okay, I'll see you later, Fusion. Yeah, so this show's always more interesting when I've got questions to answer. Certainly, there will be weeks when we don't have a lot of questions or whatever, and I've got topics for that. There's always something to talk about, especially when it comes to LionWing stuff. But this week, lots of Embryo Machine questions, which is great. So Embryo Machine is our latest Kickstarter. It is currently running on Kickstarter. We're in week 2. And we've had a really good turnout for the Kickstarter so far. We are approaching our 5th stretch goal. I think we're about 1,300 away from the $37,000 stretch goal, which is the inclusion of some new terrain. I'll talk about that here in a minute because we had a question on that. But yeah, so things are moved along quite well. We end so the campaign ends next Thursday, if I'm remembering correctly. So we still got some time, still got about 8 or 9 days left in the campaign. The second week of a Kickstarter campaign is always the most challenging, I think anyway. It can sometimes be the most grindy. Fortunately, I have played a lot of JRPGs in my life, so I'm ready and used to the grind. But it's been great interacting with everyone. We try to post updates every day. I think tonight will probably be the only update that I don't post. This will be the only day that I don't post an update on, even over the weekend. So some people in the Discord know, but probably the larger Kickstarter audience who are not on Discord, they do not know. I had what I thought was a wicked case of food poisoning, but then a bunch of other people in my house got sick. My wife, my son. So clearly there was a bug making its way through our house this weekend, and actually was hospitalized Friday into Saturday. And that was not fun, but nevertheless, still managed to pump out an update even then. So I'm really committed to updating regularly, and I'm really committed to updating most days. I really do try to update every day, but again, tonight I don't know if I'll get to another update, just because I'm doing this show and there's a lot of stuff to go through tonight. So. With that said, this show drops every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on Twitch, obviously. That's where we're broadcasting right now. If you can't catch it, you can catch us on playback. I put everything up on YouTube, and soon we will be putting everything up in podcast form. So someone in the YouTube comments asked, hey, is this going to be a podcast? Or I would like to hear it as a podcast as well, and which is awesome. I am going to be putting it in a podcast form. I'm actually almost done converting episode 1 to an audio track that sounds halfway decent. So I'm hoping to have episode 1 and 2 in podcast form up on all your favorite podcast apps next week sometime. Don't hold me to that, though. I'm really going to try. But next week with the Kickstarter ending, it's already going to be a crazy week. But I am definitely going to try to make that happen. So there you have it. All right. So like I said, this show was mostly born out of wanting to connect better with the community, with the LionWing community. And part of doing that was opening up the floor for your questions and then having a set time every week to be able to answer those questions. I try to respond to questions in the Discord as quickly as I can. I don't get to all of them, but nevertheless, if I don't answer your question in Discord, you can always drop it in the LionWing Talks Q&A channel in our Discord, and I will most definitely get to that question then. I now have a little bit of help with collecting all of those questions and putting them into a doc. So Sword Rhapsody on the Discord reached out to me last week and said, hey, if you ever need me help, like with show notes or whatever, like I'm used to the audio world. I'm used to podcasting. I could help you out. It might save you a couple minutes. And so I said, yes, sir. I will most definitely take you up on that offer. And so he arranged the show notes today. So thank you, Sword Rhapsody. You are fantastic. So if you ask a question in the Discord and you get a response from Sword Rhapsody, and your question is deemed by him or me as being good for LionWing Talks, he might directly respond, or he might emoji it to indicate that he's adding it to the list or something like that. But between the two of us, we should have it covered now. So there we go. That should make things run even more smoothly. So we've got another show dropping tomorrow. We're doing another live stream. Tomorrow's show will not be a LionWing Talk show, but it will nevertheless be up on Twitch, and then it'll be up on YouTube as well. And it's going to be the graphic designer, Tyler, and I walking everyone through what our process was like localizing Embryo Machine. So look forward to that, 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. EST. Okay, so that's enough housekeeping stuff. Let's get to the fun stuff. I'm going to start with Embryo Machine. So we have a lot of questions and comments about Embryo Machine, as you might suspect we would, with it being the Kickstarter that is currently running. So I'm going to start with the questions. We've got about a dozen questions here. So, and then we've got some comments. Let's start with the first one. This came from Reshi at some point, I believe, in the Discord chat. Is there a chance we could get like a premium double-sided playmat? So I kind of already answered his question in the chat, but because most people aren't in the chat, I figured I'd throw up the question here and answer it here as well. So there's not any plans right now to have a double-sided playmat. So I love playmats. Playmats are fantastic. Embryo Machine is as much a card game as it is a war game, a movement-based war game with game pieces and moving around your mechs on a map. And because it is equal parts card game and war game, one might suspect it would be sort of the perfect game for a playmat, but it's actually not. So, I wish it was. Again, I love playmats myself. I have too many of them. I don't need any more playmats in my life, but I just keep buying them. Even as I'm like buying them, I'm having the conscious thought, don't buy that, Bradley. Don't buy that. I bought it. It's really kind of sick. I don't even use half of them. I just get them, I unwrap them, I look at them, I say, oh, I love this thing, and then I fold them up, and that's it. Especially during quarantine, I just haven't had a lot of opportunities to break them out. But nevertheless, I love playmats, but we will not be offering them for Embryo Machine just because they don't make a lot of sense for Embryo Machine. I never want to offer extra components, extra goodies, if you will, that aren't really relevant, that aren't going to enhance your play experience in some ways. I think playmats can definitely enhance a play experience, but when they don't enhance a play experience, they should not be included just to like make a quick buck. So I say they're not necessary and they're not really relevant or pertinent for Embryo Machine, and that's because playmats tend to be big, and playmats are slippery because they're usually a neoprene mouse pad-like material. But the boards in Embryo Machine are small, they're compact, and the boards already are really good quality. They're pretty thick, they're sturdy. They've got a nice finish to them, which kind of goes along well with the bases of the standees. And so I don't want to mess up that tactile experience of the game. And again, I actually think a playmat would be a downgrade. Oftentimes, like in our past campaigns, I've offered a playmat because it upgrades the experience from either some kind of like paper fold out or no play area, play sheet or mat at all. And so therefore a playmat actually kind of adds to the experience, but it would just be taking away. And plus the boards are so modular. I shouldn't say they're so modular. There are way more, games that have better, more modular pieces to them. But the boards are already pretty modular that you kind of need the boards to be there. Hey there, Church. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we will not be offering any premium double-sided playmats for Embryo Machine. I wish we could, but I can't in good conscience sell those to you guys because, again, what comes in the box is already so good. So it's like you don't need to spend extra. Oh, that's lots of Valkyria Chronicles in the background. Yes, yes, it is. I love Valkyria Chronicles. That's a top 5 series for me. All right, so question number 2. This came from the Kickstarter. If I add on items to my pilot slash ace tier pledge, will I only pay my pledge tier shipping, or will I need to pay whatever costs the add-ons incur? So it'll be the latter. So that's something to be mindful of, that your add-ons will obviously add to either the size or the weight, or in most cases both, of the shipping parcel, and of course that is going to affect the dimensions of the box, and that's going to affect you know the postage. The shipping costs. So be mindful of that. So we've done that in all of our campaigns. I don't think we've ever charged anything astronomical for that add-on shipping. No one has ever like even remotely contacted us to say, hey, this shipping's too high. That's never happened in 4 campaigns now, or I guess in 3, since this is our 4th one. So I think we're pretty reasonable in that regard, but it is something just for you to be aware of, you know, going in, that, you know, when you get into the pledge manager, you're going to pay your shipping, because the shipping is not part of your pledge tier on the Kickstarter itself. We make that known in various places, but then anything you add on will be an additional charge. It'll be reasonable, of course. So just something for you to be aware of. Will the ace tier still include the cardboard standees as well? Yes, indeed. So if you are, if you got the ace tier, which means you're getting the acrylic standees and the metal token set, you're still going to get all of the base components as well. So the cardboard standees, the punch board, the cardboard tokens. So you're going to have 2 sets. You're going to have a really nice set of standees and tokens. And then you're going to have your base set, which the base set standees and tokens are of nice quality too. It's not like you know, we're offering cheap components in that regard. I think they're of good quality. So if you're only getting the base set, you're getting some awesome stuff in the box. But if you've upgraded to that ace tier, yeah, you're getting both for sure. We're definitely not just going to give you one over the other. That would be kind of messed up. We wouldn't do that to you. Let's see here. Will the game include blank Embryo Machine boards for playing custom mechs? So right now we are going to offer a link on our website to be able to print off those blank Embryo Machine unit boards yourself. There might be something coming that might serve the purpose of an actual blank board that you could write on, but we're not ready to talk about that just yet. You know, there's still 9 days in the campaign. You know, patience, right? Is there line of sight mechanics in the game? Yes. So I saw some confusion about this. Hey there, Sin. Thanks for joining us. I saw some confusion about this in the comments. It seemed that at least one person, maybe 2 people, thought that line of sight was not in the game, and line of sight most definitely is in the game. So just because there are not like 3D terrain pieces on the maps in the play area on those battlefields does not mean that there's not line of sight mechanics, because there definitely are line of sight mechanics. So you'll be able to see on some of the I'm looking at the board behind me. If you can't tell, I've got my playboard set up. You'll be able to see on some of the maps that there's elevated terrain, and it's going to tell you on the map when a square on the map is elevated, and that is going to block your line of sight. Now there are some ways to get around that. There are some weapons that will ignore elevated terrain. It's kind of like your typical stuff. If you're firing sort of an arcing missile of some kind, that's going to be able to go over that terrain, and it's not going to affect it. However, if you're just firing from the hip like a machine gun, yeah, that elevated terrain is going to get in the way. And it sort of depends on how high that terrain is elevated. So there's multiple things to consider there. But nevertheless, line of sight is definitely in the game. Don't think otherwise. Someone had a question here on the Kickstarter that said, will we get a sense of dodging attacks and parrying melee attacks in this game? Or are attacks mainly mitigated through armor cards? And then how do lightweight units survive? So a lot to unpack there. Okay, so there are some instances of being able to dodge or parry attacks. It's mostly done through cards. Well, I shouldn't say mostly. It is done through cards. However, the majority of the time, you're going to be mitigating damage through armor cards. Now, the rub of that is depending on which mech you're choosing is going to determine whether or not you are going to have any armor cards. So some of the smaller mechs actually do not have any armor cards in their decks. So I think about Hystrix, and I'm thinking about the update that I posted 2 nights ago, where I looked at the lopsided matchup of Hystrix, who is a large, a heavy armored mech, versus Fornice, who is a very small, light, nimble mech. So Fornice has no armor cards in its deck. So if you're going to take damage as Fornice, you're just going to take damage. Which is why Fornice is probably, in my opinion anyway, from all of my time with the game, the most challenging mech to play. I mean, the most challenging pre-built mech to play, because again, you can play this game in a multitude of ways. You can play it straight out of the box with the mechs that come pre-built, and they come with pre-built decks, or you can take that pre-built mech and you can customize that pre-built deck, or you can build from the ground up your own mech, which includes assigning their own stats and then creating their deck from the ground up. So there are multiple ways to play, but I'm just talking about kind of going with the pre-built stuff, because I think when people first get the game, that's what they're going to do. That's the best way to learn the game. Before you kind of jump in and start doing deck construction and creating your own mech from scratch, you're probably just going to want to play with what we give you in the box. And so Fornice, to me, is the most challenging mech to play because it has no armor. It has no ability to mitigate damage other than making good use of the battlefield. And so the latter part of this question of how do lightweight units survive, through clever play. I mean, there aren't so the majority of your mechs are going to be sort of like your middle class mechs, and then your outlier mechs are your more specialty classes, or your more specialty mechs. You're like super slow, super heavy hitters, but can't do a damn to anything or anyone if like a mech gets inside its defenses. And then on the opposite end, you've got Fornice, who, like, you know, 2 or 3 turns and of taking some kind of missile barrage, and Fornice is pretty much done. So yeah, someone in the chat just said it's all about that movement hiding behind the cover. It really is. Now, you might be hosed though, depending on the map. There are some maps, one in particular that's a fairly open field. Now there's still terrain advantages that you can use to your benefit. And when you're laying down your sidebar terrain pieces, you can certainly choose terrain that is perhaps going to benefit your mech the most. But nevertheless, yeah, with a mech like Fornice, you really need to be able to read your opponent, be able to understand the battlefield, and kind of understand your place on that battlefield. Not just physically, I mean, just sort of figuratively understanding kind of how you fit into that particular scenario, given all of those variables. So in the update 2 nights ago, I gave that example of what happens when Hystrix goes against Fornice. Oftentimes, though, that's not the scenario you're facing. Oftentimes, it's like Fornice versus Orage or something, a real kind of all-arounder class, because there are several all-arounders in this game. And every pre-built mech kind of specializes in something different, but even with those specialties taken into consideration, some of those medium-sized mechs they tend to be the ones that players go for. They've got great stats. They've got great survivability. They're decent at, long range. They're okay, in close combat. They excel in kind of that middle area. They're the jack of all trades but master of nothing. And oftentimes people gravitate toward those, or at least that's what we've seen in our play data, and that's also what the Japanese team saw in their play data. So usually it's like Fornice versus one of those, in which case the match is far more even, as opposed to Fornice versus Hystrix. But nevertheless, so the ultra lightweight mechs, I mean, there's only one ultra lightweight mech in the game, and that's Fornice. There's another smaller mech as well, kind of the next level up before you get to your middle tier of size and armor class. But nevertheless, I talk about Fornice a lot because he is the lightest weight mech in the game. You are going to want to be able to kind of bob and weave a lot. Fornice has huge movement. He's got the highest move value in the game. So his big thing is you need to get in close. He's an assassin type. And assassin types can't take a lot of damage in any game, right? And he certainly fits that archetype here. So Treat it like you would any assassin. Sin just dropped a question here. Would you say people who get a strong understanding of these specialized mechs have an advantage? um, maybe, maybe. I mean, the thing about the specialty mechs isn't necessarily that if you understand them well, you are then going to be able to mop the floor with anyone who doesn't understand their mech. I mean, the specialty mechs are specialty mechs, which means they fill a very particular niche. And even if you understand that niche really well, if someone is playing an all-arounder class like Arage, um, and even though you know your specialty mech really well, that's still by default might not be enough for you to have a default advantage over your opponent. Now, you might just be a better player, and of course, the better player is always going to have a default advantage over their opponent, regardless of who they're playing. But I wouldn't say that just because you pick a specialty class and you know that specialty class really well, you are then going to be able to steamroll other people. Because if you meet someone who knows their class just as well as you know your specialty class, it's then just a match of tactics and wit, not necessarily you're pitting a game design element against another game design element. Um, so I think that's how I would answer that question. Certainly, I'm thinking back to our play data. So so I played Fornise a lot. I liked the challenge of Fornise, especially in the beginning. I was a little masochistic and like I liked getting my ass kicked early on as I learned that character, and just using the pre-built stuff. I'm not talking about customizing anything or deck construction. Um, but once I understood that mech, I felt very competent uh, with him, and so I felt that I could handle myself kind of in any situation, not because like I'm this fantastic player by default, but just because I put a lot of practice in Fortnite. I really wanted to get good with that character. But, there were also people on the team who, again, I go back to Hystrix because we loved this matchup. I don't know why we liked this matchup so much, but we had a Hystrix player on our team. That was kind of their main. That was their main. I think the folks at 90 Second Nerd, Dallas at 90 Second Nerd, who did one of our videos, he was a Hystrix player as well. And I found when our Hystrix player was playing someone else, like Argyrios or something, that Hystrix player was really good. It didn't necessarily mean that they always won their match, but like when this particular team member fielded Hystrix, it's like, okay, here we go. I gotta put my best foot forward. So I don't know. That's a long, winding way of answering your question. I think in some cases, depending on player skill, understanding a specialized mech might have its advantages. But I think if both players are sort of equal skill level, then just the fact that that mech is a specialty mech doesn't give it any sort of inherent bonus. Okay, let's see here. Thanks for that question. I like when people just drop questions in the chat. I like having to think on my toes like that. Will the game box accommodate sleeves? The answer is no. There's a lot of cards in this game, and the thing about LionWing games is we really try to make games with a small form factor in mind, a small footprint. That's always important for me. If for nothing else, because then a retailer is more likely to carry our game. If they don't know us, I mean, we're a pretty niche publisher, right? Doing niche games. They're probably not going to take a huge chance on ordering a bunch of copies of, let's say, Embryo Machine. And so if I can make Embryo Machine small enough to where they say, you know what, I don't know much about this game, but it's not going to take up a ton of shelf space, sure, I'll grab 2 copies. Then I've succeeded in my mission of making small form games. So I like small form games for myself because I have too many games and not enough shelf space to display them all. I like them for that reason. I like them because retailers are in the exact same boat as me. They have the exact same problem. Not enough shelf space, too many games. And I just don't like big, unnecessarily unwieldy boxes. It's just not for me. I think Wild Hunt Festival will actually be sort of our largest box, not our heaviest. This or Testament will be our heaviest games, but I really try to keep the box size down as much as possible. And so I know people who sleeve, they hear that and they groan. It's, oh, come on. But I can't make a box large enough for sleeves when it would increase the size of the box pretty dramatically, especially when you have as many cards in your box as Embryo does. And I also can't make that decision based upon the few folks who like to sleeve. I mean, I'm a sleever, and there are plenty of sleevers out there, and there are plenty of sleevers who have backed our projects and will continue to back our projects and are backing Embryo Machine and are listening to this right now, and they're groaning. And I get that, but unfortunately, we sleevers are not. We typically are not the norm. There tend to be more people who do not sleeve than sleeve. And so, for those reasons alone, Embryo's box will not accommodate sleeved cards. And there's just a lot of components in Embryo Machine. So the box is small for him, yes, but it weighs like over 2.5 pounds. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this box, a lot of paper, a lot of cardboard. And I understand cardboard is paper, but I think you know what I mean when I talk about boards and tokens versus cards. And we're adding stuff through stretch goals too. So the 2.5 pounds was before all the stuff we added in the stretch goals. So by the time we throw in rule books for solo play, cards for solo play, a new map, I mean, we're going to add another 0.5 pound right there. And I'm not going to add any more poundage, if you will, to the game to accommodate sleeves. And plus, the larger a box is or the heavier a box is, then as we talked about in one of the earlier questions, you just drive up your shipping costs. And we're already taking a hit on the shipping costs as it is. I mean, that's pretty much how we do all of our campaigns is we charge a shipping rate that is lower than the actual shipping rate. So that is why we will not be accommodating sleeves. How many more stretch goals do you all have planned? A few more. A few more. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, week 2 of a campaign is always kind of the slowest week, but then things really kind of pick back up in the last 72 hours, but especially the last 48 hours, and then definitely in the last 24 hours. So, part of running a Kickstarter is like trying to find this almost impossible balance of how do you make sure you're showing that you've got stretch goals and that you are unlocking stretch goals and that your campaign has momentum, and at the same time you don't want to overcommit to too many stretch goals, and then you don't want to reveal all of those stretch goals at once, because what happens if you don't reach those stretch goals? Then that doesn't look great either, and then that crushes like the whole psychology of the campaign, including the psychology on our end. And so stretch goals it's a delicate balance of finding the right amount, finding the right intervals of the stretch goals, making sure that the intervals that you're offering the stretch goals make sense cost-wise, and shipping-wise, because most people think, okay, so you're going to produce some new cards. So if your stretch goal is $5,000, that $5,000 is going to go toward those card illustrations, right? And yes, that is true, but that cost is also going to go toward the printing cost of printing those new cards and any changes in shipping, however minute. And so stretch goal costs they're a tricky thing. They're hard to get right. I don't think people appreciate stretch goals enough, the sort of the math behind them. Because if you get a stretch goal wrong, it doesn't look good. I don't think people won't back a great product because of a bad stretch goal, but I certainly don't want to be. I don't want to be the company to really fully test that theory. So that said, on to the next question. Oh, Sin's got a question here in the chat. Do you, once COVID's over, do you plan on ever attending any sort of conventions? Yes, absolutely. So that was our plan in 2021, and then the world had other plans. And so I don't think conventions are coming back in 2021 at all. So I think realistically, we're looking at conventions sometime in 2022, and I would wager we're looking more toward the middle and maybe even the end of 2022 before conventions kind of kick back in. And perhaps there are some conventions that start up before then, but I think I'm talking about big conventions where people feel safe enough to go to. So I still think we've got a while. But that being said, yes, LionWing up until now has just been sort of an online has only really had an online presence. We've never had any real convention presence. I mean, our first project was in 2018, and that took a while to produce. We didn't release that until close to summer of 2019, and and so that whole time we were just trying to figure this stuff out. Then we released some video games in there, some Steam games that took up some time, and so we really didn't kind of laser focus in on tabletops being our only business until kind of the very end of 2019 as we were working on Testament, and then into 2020 when we said, yeah, no, we're going to make this shift into board games, and so that's what kind of came along with my decision of, yeah, we're making this shift in the board games. That means we've also got to start attending conventions. So 2020 obviously had different plans, but going forward, once we're back to some state of normal, yeah, we will definitely be at conventions, especially the bigger ones. I don't know if we'll be at every convention ever. In fact, no, we will not be at every convention ever. That's lunacy to think that I could even do that. But certainly we will be at the important ones. That's the plan anyway. We're Cincinnati, Ohio, so we're not like smack dab in the middle of the country, but we're close enough to kind of all the big shows that if you're a show in the Midwest, the Southeast, the Northeast, we will be there. But obviously, we're going to be traveling west as well for the shows out west, for the bigger shows out west. So we'll be around, and hopefully, I would love to be able to see some folks from the Kickstarter, from any of our Kickstarters, from our Discord especially. I would love to meet up with some of you all once we are able to do so. That'd be fantastic. I just want to put some faces with names. You get to know people just by their Discord handle. I want to see people and like hear their voice. Okay, so the next question. Is the new terrain editions unlocked at 37,000 like terrain elements to place on top of the maps? Well, no, not exactly. So the terrain elements that we have so far, hold on, let me grab some here. This isn't going to make for great audio if you're listening to this on playback and podcast form where you're not watching the video, because I'm about to show two pieces of terrain here. Try to do this without knocking over my mic as I talk into the background. Great audio. Thanks. I'm a real pro here. Okay. So the terrain that we're talking about here is will come in the form of these boards here. These are modular boards that socket into the battlefields themselves. So here we're looking at terrain that has it's elevated +1. That's what that +1 means. I think I mentioned that in one of the updates. There's some more terrain. Those can be starting squares. And then along the bottom here is just our quick reference for how actions are resolved in what order. And here's some more terrain. So some forest terrain. And then some field terrain. So it'll be terrain like that. That's what we're looking forward to. I just talked to Shigaki-san 2 nights ago. So we're getting the same illustrator who's done all of the map illustrations and all of the terrain illustrations for all 3 of the Embryo Machine Japanese releases. So we're going to bring them back to illustrate the new map that we unlocked and then the new terrain as well. And that's also why the terrain stretch goal is less than the rest of the stretch goals that we've unlocked so far. So most of our stretch goals up until recently have been $5,000 unlocks, in the interval of $5,000. But this one was a much smaller one because obviously terrain is not as expensive to illustrate and to produce. So we are well on our way, well over halfway to that $37,000 milestone. So it's definitely looking like we're going to get some new terrain, which will be cool. Again, this is all content that you cannot get in the Japanese version. I remember, I think it was like day 2 or day 3. Brenna, who is handling our social media primarily right now, I'm doing some of the posts, but she's doing the vast majority of them right now. She dropped me a message in the Discord like, hey, I'm just kind of like, using Google Translate here, but it seems like Japanese Embryo Machine players are like jealous of what you're adding to the game, and not that I like start off trying to make another audience jealous of stuff that they don't have, but it does indicate to me it's always a good sign when the original audience for a game, and in this case the Japanese audience, sees what we're doing, sees what we're producing for the Kickstarter, and says, "Hey, I want that. That's awesome." That happened a lot in Gun and Gun, a lot, and then it happened in Wild Hunt Festival as well. So that's always a cool little thing. I don't want to leave them out, but at the same time, that's part of the fun of Kickstarter. It's part of the fun of our Kickstarters is we always try to do cool shit. So, all right, next question. Why are I got a question here in the chat. I'll jump into this real quick before I go on to my Embryo Machine question. Would the solo variant be able to be converted to a co-op variant? Yes, I think so. We don't have any official plans to do that, but so the solo variant, the solo mode, and I mentioned this in the update where I talked about the solo mode. The solo mode is not some tacked on, half-assed solo mode. Like it's legit. It has substance to it. This is like a meaningful addition to the game. And that was a big thing for me. So I'm a solo gamer. I love solo games. I hate when a Kickstarter game, or really any game that didn't originally have a solo mode, suddenly adds a solo mode. And it's like, oh yeah, clearly you added this. And it was like a rush job. And I get like sometimes you're just strapped for time, you're strapped for resources, you're strapped for assets. That's what you got to do. Trust me, as a publisher, I really, really understand. But as me, the consumer, I don't like that. And so when I was talking with Shigaki-san about, hey, how do we, that was the first thing that I told him that I wanted. Very first thing. Before we talk about any of these other stretch goals, we're doing a solo mode, all right? I didn't give him an ultimatum, but I said, I want to do a solo mode. And he was totally on board. But we also talked, after we kind of decided what our additional content was going to be for the Kickstarter, he and I were talking, and I said, I want this to feel like a mode that would have shipped with the game, regardless of Kickstarter. I want it to feel like an extension of the game that already exists, not just something we added on because we had to. And so the AI system is pretty robust. Shigaki-san created this AI system from scratch. The solo mode has its own set of rules, and it's not just like a page of rules. It's like multiple pages of rules, a bunch of new cards. So this is the real deal. So I think, with that being said, I think you could figure out a way to make it co-opable. I'm thinking about the mechanics right now. I'm just trying to like play it out in my head of what co-op would look like. I think it would work. I fear that you would have to scale it a little bit, because I think with two people or more than two people, you might make the game easier. So I don't know. That's not something that we've talked about. That's not something that we've been like interested in, but that doesn't mean that the community can't get to it, and I'm going to be talking about community homebrew content here in a little bit, because someone asked a question about it. So I'm going to like press the pause button on answering that question and circle back to it here in a little bit. Another question from the chat: do you have an idea of when the official Embryo TTS mod will be updated slash fixed? So if you're talking about updated slash fixed, where you have the stacking issue of where you've got stuff sort of falling through the table infinitely, yes, that'll be fixed soon. If you mean something else, you'll have to spell it out for me, because I'm not picking up what you're putting down, but hopefully that's what you meant. Yeah, and Twin Blade said, yeah, I'm glad the designer was on board to help out with the solo mode. Yeah, we weren't going to make that. That was the same case with Testament. So with Testament, we added that EX mode, and Sometimes you just got to know your limitations in life. And while I have my own game that I've designed, I am not a designer. That's not how I identify myself. And so I leave that to the really smart people, the people who know what they're doing. And so all of the new stuff has been designed by Shigaki-san himself, who is the designer of Embryo Machine. And so this is all from his brain. And so that way there's a nice consistency in how things play and how things work. Mechanically speaking, gameplay wise, I want it all to feel like the same game and not just these disjointed parts. So glad I answered your question also about the TTS mod. Sounds like that's what you were asking about. All right. Next question. So why are they called embryo machines? So I'm going to answer that question directly, and then I'm going to talk about the name of the game Embryo Machine in general, because it's been, let's say, the topic of conversation for some people. Okay, so there is a storyline reason why they're called Embryo Machines. I don't know if you all scrolled down about halfway through the campaign page, but we have a little story excerpt there that sets up the background. It's like the premise of the game. I think it's also mentioned in our trailer as well, but it's not directly talked about why they're called embryo machines, but you can certainly gather why they might use that name when you think that these are organic machines that have been excavated from the earth. So these aren't like embryo machines are not made in a hangar somewhere. This is not your typical, mech. This is not like a Gundam, or a mobile suit, I should say. These were found inside the planet in which the story takes place, and then they were dug out. And so that in and of itself sort of talks about why they use the term embryo, and then why they're machines, because they are machines in the truest form. So they were sort of hatched from the earth, if you will. In turn a Gundam, but this is exactly what happens in turn a Gundam. I'm not sure. I feel like there's a word missing in there, so it's throwing me off. If you can retype that, I will definitely answer it. But certainly this isn't, I mean to say that, the embryo machines are not necessarily man-made. Now, there's a little bit of, the lore is kept a little cryptic. So I mentioned in episode 1 of LionWing Talks that the mobile suits in turn a Gundam are excavated from the earth. Yeah, I suppose I meant that these are not things that are like necessarily kept in a hangar and like maintained by humans, and that someone jumps in and pilots. That's not the type of mech that embryo machines are. So a little different than I think a lot of mechs are thought of, which is I like the organic element of an embryo machine. I think that's kind of what makes them a little different. I mean, certainly there have been plenty of shows or games that have utilized that same kind of principle with their mechs and like the background behind that mech. But nevertheless, so in terms of, I want to talk about the embryo machine name in general. So a lot of people have wondered, like is that a good name? I remember when we first started running the Facebook ads, there were quite a number of comments from people saying like, embryo machines, what kind of name is that? Or we got the awesome game, bad name. We got those comments. Now there were people who were also like, I don't know what that name means, but I like it. So in localization, you certainly, and we'll talk about this in tomorrow night's stream as well, but I'll preview it here. In localization, you have an opportunity to change a lot of things. And it sort of depends on the original creators as well. You know, some designers, some creators don't want you to change a lot of their stuff. They're more protective of their work. And then other creators are like, hey, go at it. Change whatever you want to change. Change the art, change the name. Add to, you know, add mechanics to the game, whatever the case may be. For me, though, as a localization studio, unless a name is just wildly unusual or utilizes words that just don't translate well to being in the title of something, I really try to respect the designers, the creators' original vision for their game. So Embryo Machine, even in Japan, was called Embryo Machine. On the box in English lettering, it's called Embryo Machine, and it's got a little subtext in Japanese. But the predominant language in the Japanese version on the box is English, spelled out Embryo Machine. So this was a very clear, conscious, intentional decision that the designers made. They had the opportunity to change the name to something else. They didn't. They understood the meaning of the two words separate and also together. They got it. It's not like they were missing something. And they still chose to put those two words together to create their game called Embryo Machine. It was important for me as the localization and publishing studio to respect that. Clearly, there was thought that went into that. I'm not smarter than the creators of the game. I don't know the designer's game better than the designers. I just don't. No matter how much I play it, no matter if I'm publishing it in another language or not, I don't know their game better than them. And so it felt both arrogant and disrespectful for me to change that name. Not to mention, I fucking like the name. I just do. I think it's different. I think it's lovably weird. I think that I have seen so many games cross my Facebook feed that I then have had to go back to my settings and my ad settings 2, 3, 4, 5 days later to try to find what that game was, because I can't remember what it was called to look it up. And I didn't like the post to be able to go back to my activities log and say, oh yeah, it was that game. I would imagine that when you see the name Embryo Machine, you don't forget it. That's not a forgettable name. And so the choice to keep Embryo Machine as the name was done for those three reasons: respect of the designers, my own liking of the name, and you're not going to forget it. So there was a marketing strategy behind it as well. So that's why we went with that name. I feel very passionate about the name. That's why that's why I speak about it the way that I do. I just really like it. All right. So another question here, and this is, so I took like a specific question, a couple specific questions, and put it into one more general question so that I could answer it more generally here. And that question is, would X game term be better than the one you're using for Y game term? So someone in the Discord has had very thoughtful feedback for us regarding certain terms in the game. So Embryo Machine was a different kind of project when it came to the translation of the project. So unlike most of our previous games where we did the translation ourselves, or where we did a lot of the translation work, Embryo Machine was a combination of work from Group S&E. And if you missed last week's show, then Group S&E are the original creators of Embryo Machine. They created the Embryo Machine tabletop role-playing game that this board game is adapted from. So they're still heavily engaged and invested in Embryo Machine because it's their world. They created it. They then passed the game off to Mosaic, who then designed the board game around it. But nevertheless, so they did a lot of the translation work themselves, which was cool for us. This happened with Gun and Gun as well, where they had, Gun and Gun had someone on their team, Ken, who was fluent in both languages. And so I especially like when I've got an opportunity to work with a team who knows both languages well, because there's no one better to translate your game than the people who it is the closest to. And so Group S&E actually came up with a lot of the terminology in the game. Now, we changed some things here and there in the editing process. We have a whole localization editing process that we go through, regardless of who translates the game, whether it's done in-house or it's done out-of-house. In this case, out-of-house. We still have a pretty rigorous localization editing process that we go through. And so we made changes. We made changes to certain card names. We made changes to the Embryo Machine names. We made quite a number of changes there, especially if you compare the two side by side. If you look at the mech board for Rage in English compared to his board or its board in Japanese, you'll see that the name's quite different. So we did take some liberties there. Anytime that you're editing something in localization, you have to make sure that when you're going to change something, you better have a really good reason for it. That reason better increase or enhance readability. It better increase or enhance understanding of that thing that you're changing. In this case, that card. Sometimes you change something because it looks better, visually. And, we're working with a visual medium here, big time. It's usually the former two reasons that you change something as opposed to the third one. But the third one does happen in localization. Having worked in localization in video games and now in tabletop games, I kind of know, there are many reasons why someone edits something to something different than it was in the original language. Nevertheless, Group S&E was very intentional with some of their language. And so we tried to respect that where possible. Again, this is their baby. They didn't choose terms sort of at random. Now, that doesn't mean that everything you see on the Kickstarter page, in our videos, in the assets that we've shown off, in the rulebook, what have you, is the final product. I think I've mentioned numerous times in Kickstarter updates and on the Kickstarter page itself that that we're not done editing the game. We still have more passes to do. And with every pass, you tend to find something that you want to fix, which is why at some point in localization, you just got to call it quits. You got to say, good enough is good enough. You want to make sure you catch all the big stuff. You want to make sure you catch your grammatical issues, your syntax issues, your very clear like typos, that kind of thing. But really, localization could never be done if you let the editor just keep doing their thing. They would just keep changing and changing. I mean, having been a localization editor for a long time, I know that if you gave me enough time, I would go back and I would reread something and I would always be able to say, I can do better. So at some point, you just got to ship the damn thing, right? But nevertheless, we're not done with our passes yet. And so everything you've seen is not set in stone. Some of those things won't change. In fact, a lot or most of what you see will not change because we've been very intentional with our changes thus far. But there will still be changes. And in fact, someone in the Discord gave us really good feedback on one thing that I am going to bring to the team to talk about, changing up a term, because I do like the term that was suggested to us by one of the backers. So you never know, what feedback is going to kind of get through and make it into the game. That's why I always like feedback. I don't care the nature of the feedback, as long as it's constructive feedback and it's not just someone shitting on your product to be shitting on your product and they don't have anything to be able to provide of substance, then I want to hear about it. And so I love good, thoughtful feedback. And I can't remember the name of the Discorder, but they had some really good, thoughtful feedback. So, all right. That is, those are the Embryo Machine questions for tonight. So we had a lot of Embryo Machine questions tonight. Thank you all who sent in those questions. I see we're already coming up on 60 minutes, so I'm not going to take a ton longer in the rest of the questions that we have, but it would be remiss of me to discard the questions that I have not gotten to that people have asked. So I'm going to go through those. I might go through them in a more rapid fire manner, but nevertheless, I'm going to go through them. So let's do it. What is LionWing's position on possible homebrew content for games such as Gun and Gun and Embryo Machine? Yeah, so our position is we welcome it. Anything to get the community engaged and involved, we're down. As long as you're not trying to like sell your homebrew content, that's an issue. That's a legal issue. But if you're making content, to me that says you feel really passionately, really strongly about one of our products, and that means you're really invested in that product. And in the role that I'm in, there's nothing that I could wish for more than someone to be so invested in something we've made, something that we've published. There's nothing cooler than that. So homebrew content is fine by us. Again, so long as you don't sell it. But I think that kind of thing is the signs of a healthy community. If no one's talking about your game, then you've done something wrong, right? Or your game doesn't have the lasting power, or it doesn't have the ability to foster a community. But that's one of the things that I look for in a game, and this kind of bleeds into a question I'll answer here in a second. Is how are people going to come back to this game time and time again, or is this like a one and done game? Like I don't really have a ton of interest in publishing games that are one and done. I want something that is going to come back to the table a couple times, or in a lot of our cases and a lot of our games, it's going to come back to the table time and time again because there's enough meat on that bone for it to do so. So that's where I stand on that. So this bleeds into the next question of what goes into deciding which projects you want to localize. And I've mentioned this and I've mentioned this in interviews and whatnot, but I'll say it here again because someone specifically asked the question for this week's show. So the first thing I look for is, does the game look good? Does it have a striking aesthetic? I tend to like anime art styles, and so that's it. Boy, this is, some people are going to like try to revoke my gamer card for saying this, but I'm just trying to be honest. If I don't like the way a game looks, I don't care how good a game it is. I don't want to play it, and I won't play it. And I would be kidding myself, and I'd be disingenuous if I said I would play a game that I don't like the look of, because I just won't. That's why I can't get into like Catan. Like, I have no interest in playing that game. And some people, that right there, someone's like, all right, no gamer card for you. But it's true. Like, I'm going to be looking at these cards all game, 20, 30, 60, 90, 120 minutes. Like, I want something that's visually pleasing to my eye. And I'm going to get real bored sitting at the table playing with people if the cards can't keep if they can't keep my interest. So the first criteria that I always look for is like, does the game look good? Does it catch my eye? The other elements sort of vary. I tend to sort of, I'm not particularly well-rounded when it comes to being a gamer. I like co-op legacy games or like boss battle games. I like competitive card games. I like solo games. So for me, and perhaps someday this will come back and haunt me, but it hasn't so far. So for me, if I don't personally like a game, I don't want to localize it. If I won't play it, I don't want to publish it. Which I'm sure I'm missing out on like all these fantastic games, and I fully recognize that. But that's my process. So, if the art catches me, then I'm going to look into the rules. If I say from the rules, like, okay, no, this is a game I would play. All right, then I've sort of checked box number 2. Box number 3 is, will other people like it then? Like, can this be marketed to other people? And like, are people going to see it and say, hey, that looks cool. Let me see what that's all about. Like, I always think about the Facebook ad. Like, I find so many games just from the ads that I see on Facebook, and I click it and I'm like, I would have never found out about this game. Like, I don't got enough time to be scouring whatever to try to find this game. But the aesthetics and the quick premise that's given to you on a Facebook ad, that can go a long way. And so I have to be confident that people are also going to like the game as well. But there have been some games, where I've liked it. I'm like, I don't even know if people are going to like this. Like, I have no idea, but I'm taking a chance on it. Our first game was like that, Sonoma Coliseum. It's a very lightweight kind of party game, very luck driven. It's adorable. I had a blast with it. I was like, this is like mindless, stupid fun. This is so cool. I want people to play this. There's very little strategy involved, but damn, it's fun. I bet people are going to hate this, but I love it. And yep, that's going to be our first game. So that probably wasn't the right approach, but it nevertheless was the approach that I took. So sometimes, even if I don't know if I can, if other people are going to like it, I'll still go through with it if I like it enough. So yeah, that's that. There's more that goes into it, but I think it would just be boring if I went into all the details there. When you start to localize a game, here's another question. When you start to localize a game, do you make deals for localizing all future expansions, or is it strictly for the base game and then the expansions are a separate conversation held later? Good question. So the answer to this question is always going to depend on the company that you talk to, because some people are going to make games, or are going to make deals. They're going to make deals for an entire series. They don't just want the one game. They want the second game and the third game that come in the package. Some companies also, especially if they're larger, have the ability to do that because they've got the capital to eat loss. If the first one performs and then the second and the third ones don't, because expansions tend to perform, expansions rarely perform in the way that the first game did. Bigger companies can eat that loss and it doesn't make a huge difference for them. With LionWing, I don't have that luxury. So it'll always depend on the type of game. It'll always depend on the game. But oftentimes I'll look at a licensing deal for just a base game initially. And then it's one of those things of, let's see how this goes. Especially if I'm not sure, how popular the game is going to be. Even if I really want to say I want the next expansions, like I want those, I also have to sort of be business wise, and say, all right, Bradley, I know you really want those, but let's just see how the first one goes. And so some deals do come together in that way where I'm like, all right, we're just going to look at the base game. We're going to see what happens. If things go well, if it's successful, absolutely. Let's take a look at the next expansion or the next two expansions. But if things don't go well, we probably won't revisit this conversation. Whereas, with Gun and Gun, it was different though. When I reached out to Gun and Gun, they had not released Overheat yet. They were still about a year away from releasing Overheat. But Gun and Gun was one of those situations where I said, all right, I feel confident in this product. Let's go ahead. I want to publish both the base game and Overheat. And then there were a bunch of decisions that went into ultimately packaging the two together into a single box. But nevertheless, that was an instance where I said, hey, let's do both games. Embryo is a little different. Embryo is a lot more expensive to print. So, the base funding goal that we have for the campaign actually is not all the money that is needed to print the game. A lot of Kickstarters will do that. And that is the case with Embryo as well. And so it's a much more expensive game than any of our previous endeavors. So because because Embryo Machine is so much more expensive to produce, there was no way that I could take a risk on doing a licensing deal for base game Embryo Machine plus Throne and Border plus Gifted. There was no way that I felt confident enough to do all three of those games. I knew that Embryo Machine was going to have an audience, but Embryo Machine, it's a niche game. I mean, all of our games are niche. We are a niche company. We're like a niche of a niche. But Embryo is especially niche. I mean, mech games don't do typically all that well in the West, especially board games. Um, War games have a very particular audience, and oftentimes a war game audience doesn't overlap with an audience who loves anime looking visuals. So I now have an anime war game about mechs that's part collect that's part competitive card game. Um, I don't have miniatures. When you sort of put all that together, you see that Embryo is a very niche product, and so I knew that it made more sense in practically every regard, but especially financially, it made more sense just to focus on the base game. Now, as I've said, I think I said last week, I've said in the Discord, I've said on the Kickstarter, if Embryo Machine's Kickstarter is a success, then I definitely want to. Then I want to revisit Embryo Machine in the future. Throne and Border, the first expansion, is amazing. The newest expansion that just came out, the second expansion, which is called Gifted, amazing. Gifted introduces a bunch of cool stuff. I would love for people to be able to check those out. But, at the end of the day, I've got to balance a budget. I've got a bottom line to keep in mind. And so if it makes sense financially, and people want it, then definitely I want to publish more Embryo Machine. Let's see here. How many games do you think you'll localize a year going forward? I'm not sure. It'll always depend on the year. It'll depend on the economic environment. It'll depend on all sorts of boring factors, if you will. But that being said, 2020 is kind of or 2021 will be kind of the first year that I'm doing this practically full time. And so to be able to make that work, and because we are such a niche publisher of niche games, we probably have to then publish more games than the average company. I mean, I knew that getting into this business. I knew that LionWing was going to be a niche company. We're not out here, hawking, high fantasy miniatures based legacy games. That's not what I'm interested in. And so I always knew that the player base, the market was going to be much smaller for LionWing than it would be some other companies. And even our audience, especially as LionWing is just kind of getting going, which I consider LionWing is still just getting going. We don't even have as big of an audience as some of the other folks who are in this corner of the industry that are doing localization and bringing over Asian tabletop games and Japanese tabletop games in specific. And so we probably then, because of all of that, have to publish more games than those other companies. It's not like we can publish Gloomhaven or a Gloomhaven type game and then, let that feed us for 2 years. We don't have that luxury. And so I can't give you a hard number of how many games we're going to publish a year. But, it's going to be a more aggressive publishing schedule because it sort of has to be. A lot of our games aren't expensive, so I do, that's something that I always look for, is ensuring that our games are affordable so that as many people who want to play them can play them. And if they have the means, the financial means, I want to ensure that they're not using all of their money to buy our games. There are other things in life that either A, are more important than games, or B, there are other games people want to buy, and I want to make sure that they can do that. And so if I can price my game lower, and allow them to pick up our game, and for the price tag to be approachable, and they can also pick up another game, cool, that's good. A healthy board game industry helps every publisher. So I do kind of, hang our hat on our games are affordable, and so therefore producing more feels a little bit better. Um, we weren't supposed to use all our money on your games, says Sin. I mean, if you want to, I'm not gonna like complain. Um, so yeah, so I can't give you a hard number. I wish I could say like, oh, we're gonna localize and publish 6 a year, but I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you this for 2021. I mean, we've got 2 Kickstarters still left, and we've got a pre-order campaign coming through our web store. So you've got 4 right there. We had originally in 2020 talked about maybe introducing a 5th somewhere. I just don't know. I don't know how that's going to happen. I don't know where we would do that, if it's possible and if it's the right game and the right fit with our schedule. I'm not like going to rule it out. But right now we're looking at 4 for 2021 with the possibility of a 5th. Who knows? And the manner in which those games are delivered is also always kind of changing and up in the air. But I think for right now, we're pretty locked into 2 more Kickstarters and 1 pre-order campaign through our web store for 2021. 2022 will be an interesting year because all of our Kickstarters happening last year and this year will be in players' hands. And a lot of time will have passed since those games first came to Kickstarters, and those designers will have been busy, doing stuff. So 2022 could be an interesting year, especially if you like 2020. Okay, two last questions. One is about Gun and Gun. Will the Gun and Gun Virtual League offer prizes? I think I mentioned this in last week's show, but if I didn't, yes, we will be offering some sort of prizes for the Gun and Gun Virtual League. I think that's like part of the fun of leagues of any kind, but especially for a virtual league, it'll be. I mean, virtual leagues are always different, but virtual leagues right now are especially weird. And so we want to make sure that our virtual league is, I want to make sure that people have a reason to partake in the virtual league. I mean, certainly there's just the reason of like, you get to play the game with other people. And because we're not utilizing digital means, we're going to be utilizing the actual physical games and cameras through Discord. Hopefully you have the incentive just to be able to play your physical copy, but also there'll be some extra incentives that I think will be cool for you as well. We'll be talking about those, later in the summertime. We want Gun and Gun to get in folks' hands before we begin to kick the virtual league off. We want to give people some play time, some experience time with that game, so they feel ready for the league. Last question about Wild Hunt Festival. This is one that I've gotten a lot just in the past week. I don't know what this past week has been about, but nevertheless, and that question is, has my game shipped yet? No, your game has not shipped yet. Your game is sitting on a pallet with everyone else's in a warehouse waiting to be shipped. So that's where your game is, and that's why it hasn't shipped yet. So the good news is we have never been closer to getting those pallets shipped. So mass production, I think I mentioned this at some point, mass production on Wild Hunt Festival is done. And now it's the coordinating of logistics. Yeah, someone just said in the chat, I want my game. Yeah, no, that's essentially what I've been getting this past week. I don't know what it is about like the second week in February has just turned people into Wild Hunt Festival monsters, but nevertheless, it totally has. People have just been blowing up my email and my DMs and on Kickstarter. Nevertheless, so right now we're just trying to figure out what is the most efficient way to get the games to our fulfillment center a state over. Actually, what's interesting is so we're in Ohio, LionWing's in Ohio. Indiana is where the fulfillment company is, and all copies of the game, regardless of where in the world they're going, are going to come out of Indiana. And so I literally could drive to that fulfillment center. It would take me like 90 minutes or so, which I didn't even know that. But nevertheless, the fun little factoid there. So we've never been closer to getting those shipped to us. I was just talking with someone this morning about exporting our backer file to ensure that everything is going to get to where it needs to get to. So we're close. I mean, I don't want to say that folks will get their copies of Wild Hunt Festival before May, because we've already promised a delivery date that we couldn't deliver on, and so I'm not in the business of doing that again. That feels like shit. Anytime that like you promise something, and then you can't deliver on it, like that doesn't feel good. But so I won't do that again. But I will say that it's a possibility that people get their games before May. It was always a possibility. It's always been a possibility. I don't know if I've necessarily come out and said that, just because I didn't want to get people's hopes up too much, especially when I was first breaking the news. But that has always been a realistic possibility. Invariably, there will be some people, depending on where in the world you are, and hopefully shipping issues don't happen where a parcel gets lost or something, but invariably there will be people who get their stuff after May. And that's unfortunate. I wish I had control over that, but I just don't. So that being said, my hope is that you all will get Wild Hunt Festival soon. I do think, though, what's going to happen is I think Wild Hunt Festival and Gun and Gun are probably going to arrive pretty close to one another. So, I think it'll be sort of the summer of LionWing in many ways, because you'll be getting 2 LionWing games pretty much right as the summer season, if you're in North America, is about to kick off. So no better way to spend the summer than playing some good games. Someone said, I feel like because of the situation, the pandemic and its effects on shipping, I'm assuming they mean, I'm going to get a bunch of Kickstarter games all at once this year. Yeah, no, that is definitely going to happen. Someone has said, I think like half of my Kickstarters are due for April. Yeah, it's like April through June are kind of the big reschedule dates for delivery of games. So I think I think people will have to sort of pace themselves a little bit. You're going to have to use some self-control so you don't just like burn through all your games within 1 month. You gotta space them out a little bit so you've got a little something for each month to play. Because without the pandemic, you probably would have gotten them spaced out anyway. But now, yeah, they're all going to come within like a 60-day window, and it's going to be just absolute chaos. Okay, so that is it. I'm out of questions. Someone in the chat said, yeah, it makes no difference to me because of the pandemic. We've got something coming that might make a difference. So that's it for today's show of LionWing Talks. I'm out of questions. I'm out of updates. I'm out of talking. I've been talking for almost 90 minutes. Thank you for those who have hung in there with me and who have been engaged in the chat. This is awesome. We've got a lot more folks in the chat tonight, so seriously, thank you. It's so much more interesting when I can read comments and when people can ask questions right then and there, and I can respond to it in real time. That's so much cooler, and I think makes for a better show. So thank you all for joining me live. If you're listening on playback, thank you for listening to us on playback. You can check us out on YouTube if you did not catch us on Twitch. Or if you want to catch it again, if you want to catch this show again, you can pop over to our YouTube channel. And that's it. We'll be back tomorrow night here on Twitch, same time, 9 p.m. EST. I'll be joined by the graphic designer on Embryo Machine's localization. His name's Tyler, and we're going to be walking you through changes we made. So until then, thank you, everyone, and I'll see you next time.